Okay, this Hangout on air is live. So do I just speak directly in? Good afternoon, everyone. This is Lisa Ellis with SC for Ed, and we are very excited to be speaking with Superintendent of Education, write-in candidate, Michele Phillips. Michele, do you want to go ahead and just briefly mention your history with education and what you want the listeners to know?
Absolutely. My name is Michele Phillips, and I am running a write-in campaign for state superintendent after Israel Romero dropped out with 2.5 weeks to go. There was a void in choice for state superintendent, and I thought, as an educator, as a social studies teacher, it was my responsibility to step up and give South Carolina a choice of a teacher in that position, a teacher for teachers. I am in my 18th year in education, my 12th year in South Carolina education. I currently teach 6th grade social studies. I taught at the College of Charleston. I worked for CCSD, Charleston County Schools, doing professional development for a little bit. I currently am on the state social studies standards writing committee. I lead the primary grades team for that. I'm a mom, wife, just like most of us. We have very busy lives, and we give everything we have to our students at school too.
Yes, great. Michele, why do you think you're the best candidate for Superintendent of Ed in South Carolina?
I think because it's time that somebody in education had a voice on how we do education. I think so often we have people who are either inexperienced in education making policy or so removed from the classroom that it's different when you're on the ground. And so I think at this time in South Carolina education, we need to really be thinking about, what do our teachers need? What do our students need? What does effective instruction look like? Why are we testing so much? It's not going to improve the economic inequalities that give us the test data. So why do we keep doing it? I think that because of my background, because of my experience, because I'm a classroom teacher, that I can have those discussions in a very real way.
Great. If elected to Superintendent of Education, what would be your educational priorities?
I have 3 kind of umbrella ideas. And the first is funding. And we have to talk about funding because it's a mess. There are so many different, I don't know how else to put it. I've been looking at it. I'm like, what is happening with this? There are so many different revenue streams coming from so many different areas. None of them really seeming to add up to any meaningful, consistent, equitable funding. And if we're going to talk about improving teacher pay, which we have to do, we dramatically improve that. If we want to talk about how to better fund our schools, we have to figure out how we're funding at the state level first. The second thing that I really think we need to think about is testing. We're doing way too much testing, way too young. I mean, we're map testing kindergartners now. They can't work the mouse, and they're in there with their headphones on sideways, clicking away. And it's like, what's the point? And so we really need to slow down. I'm not against assessment. I don't think any teacher's against assessment. We need to think about what we're doing with the assessment, what we're mandated to do in terms of assessment, and then how we can adjust accordingly. And the third thing we really need to look at is first teacher retention. How can we better protect and represent and take care of the teachers we have? And then when we have that, we can look at recruitment, because it's going to be a profession people want to become a part of in South Carolina. Great. So those are my top 3.
Okay, fantastic. I liked all of those.
Thank you.
So, the issue of school safety continues to be a big thing in the news, particularly parents and community. So what would be your agenda for school safety? And then, of course, the follow-up question that has been big in South Carolina, what do you think about proposals to arm teachers?
So I spend a lot of time, this is a passionate issue of mine. I went to DC this past March for the March for Our Lives. and was proud to participate in that. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend when they were in Charleston. My son had broken his arm the day before and everything got a little cattywampus. But school safety, in terms of how it reflects the safety of the community. And if our communities continue to be plagued by gun violence, then our schools are going to reflect that. So beyond just school safety, we have to have a serious, frank conversation about how are we going to make a difference in gun violence in the U.S. As far as arming teachers, it's just ridiculous. I wish I had a better way to put it. I can't imagine trying to carry a loaded weapon and bend over and help children and clean up everything that we are, required to do. I misplace my dry erase board marker 20 times a day. And the idea of having a gun around children where it's easily accessible is just, it's horrific.
Okay, great. What do you think the role of the superintendent of education is?
I think that the superintendent should serve as a leader, should serve as an advocate, and honestly should be a servant to the districts. We need to figure out what our districts need, and that's what the superintendent should be doing. Is it should be a bottom up rather than a top down model, because it's different depending on where you are in the state. The needs here in Charleston are dramatically different than the needs in the upstate are different than the Abbeville, for example. And so the superintendent should be responsible for responding to the needs of the counties in a systematic and thoughtful way.
What are your views on protected planning time? How will you ensure that teachers get the time that they need to do what they need?
South Carolina is a funny state because, and I applaud the work that you're doing, and I've followed it very carefully because we're not a union state, and we don't even have. I've taught in Florida and I've taught in Georgia, where at least you had access to join a soft union of sorts. The idea that there's not protected planning time is alarming to me. To me, that's the most base professional thing that you can give a teacher. How can you expect us to teach if we don't plan? That's the basis of that's what we do. One of the things that I tossed around on my superintendent Facebook page earlier this week was a teacher bill of rights. I was looking at models from Louisiana and Tennessee specifically, and that I think is something that we need to have a serious discussion about. If we're going to continue to lack representation as teachers, then at the very least, we should be protected at the legislative level.
We actually, with the help of Mike Burgess, who was a teacher at River Bluff, he created a teacher bill of rights that was modeled off of Louisiana and a couple other places. We want to go ahead. I think he's gotten some support at this point, and we want to, jump on that. But yeah, you're exactly right with that. So often the Department of Education implements policies that are not in the best interest of students and teachers in schools. So what steps would you put into place to maybe prevent that from happening, or to make sure that the expectations that are handed down from the State Department are in the best interest of educating our children?
I think that's one of the powerful ideas of having somebody who's currently in education in this position, as I would have the opportunity to go to our state legislators, to go to and say, guys, this isn't going to work. I get we're struggling with literacy in South Carolina, but are 4 courses and a mandated retention in 3rd grade going to be what fixes the problem? And so we have education data. We know what works for children. We've got to do it. And I think that my job would be to advocate for that and to really not be afraid to use my voice and use the research that we have and work with legislators to make those actionable moves for South Carolina.
Okay, great. Oh, got another. There were 2 on the, no, okay. Okay, what would you do about discipline issues in South Carolina schools?
Are we talking like suspension rates? Or are we talking discipline in the classroom, or did they not specify?
In the classroom.
In the classroom. So going back to that teacher bill of rights, the one, I believe it was Louisiana that I was looking at, it's very specific about what the behavior expectations are for students. And it's teachers will not have a disrespectful child in their class. Teachers will be supported by an administration. Teachers will be part of the due process. Teachers will be part of any consequence and contact with the parent. I think that would be a strong step forward. I've worked in some pretty tough schools, and if you don't have the support of administration, where administration and even your guidance counselors and the teachers are working as a team to support student behavior, it can fall apart very easily. So I think having that very clear-cut statewide mandate could be a very powerful way to help discipline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that SC for Ed has talked about in terms of discipline as well is the class size, and the fact that in the last however many, I think since 2008 and the recession, the proviso that has negated the class size expectation. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we would like to look at is making the class sizes, mandating that the class sizes are smaller than they are in current law, just because that current law was built, 30, 40 years ago, mm-hmm. when the educational setting was very different.
Yes.
Do you think that there is a correlation between class size and student discipline or discipline problems? Or what are your thoughts on, class sizes and effectiveness of teaching?
I think class size and teacher effectiveness and behavior go together. I don't think there's any other way to say it. And it's one of those weird things where the data is so inconsistent, and anybody who's been in a classroom of 24 kids versus 34 kids, there's no question. So yes, if we're going to make South Carolina schools effective, safer, and teachers feel like they're more in control and professional and have that autonomy that I think we want as teachers, we have to have realistic class sizes where we can instruct in meaningful ways, where we can differentiate, where we can meet the needs of the children. When I look at some early childhood classes here in Charleston, we have second grade classes sitting at 26 students. Yeah. That to me is mind-boggling. 26 is pushing it for my middle school classroom, let alone a classroom full of 7-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So I think especially with early childhood, middle school, well, even high school, 28 kids, you're kind of pushing it at that point with 16 and 17-year-olds. We have to have that discussion, and it has to be real numbers and not wonky ratios that they are allowed to play with based on the adults in the building. Like, oh, let's just divide all the kids by the adults. Well, no, that's not what's happening, because then you have a class of 37 somewhere. But yeah, that has to be a part of anything we do moving forward.
Well, and that's exactly it. When you look at how districts calculate that ratio, mm-hmm. It's the number of FTEs divided by the number of students. And an FTE is all number of types of adults in
exactly.
a building. So I think on top of that class size, the formula for which it's calculated needs to be sort of written out as well, so we have an accurate picture of that. Okay. So one of the things that teachers are becoming very frustrated with, myself included, is what I'm going to call the giving of grades. So the mm-hmm. fact that a grade, can't be lower than a 50, or you can't give a 0 if they don't turn in the work. And so what policies or, mandates would you put into to sort of prevent that inflation of grades, I guess, for lack mm-hmm. of a better word or term?
And grading is such a funny thing, because I've played with different models over the years. I've done the, nobody gets below a 50, or extended periods for missing work versus it's due the next day or it's a 0. And it varies from year to year. But when we're talking about, again, teacher respect, teacher autonomy, professionalism of teachers, if you trust us to teach the child, you're going to have to trust us to grade the child. Otherwise, we don't know what they learned.
Somebody tweet that. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was like, wait, I never know if I'm like blinking out on these or anything. But for a time period when we're so focused on assessment, that day-to-day assessment that we do, that measuring of their learning, grading is that crucial data we need. So when it's being mandated to change it from the outside, that doesn't measure what's happening inside of our classrooms. As state superintendent, I don't know, because grading is a district policy. I don't know if I would have the power to make any sort of changes on that, but I can certainly advocate for professionalism for teachers, including on grading.
Okay. They took my notebook away, so I don't know what the Okay. Okay, what would be your plan to increase the number of people going into education to help remedy the crisis down the road, or the crisis as it currently is?
But it's happening.
And it's getting
it's so right now we have a couple different issues happening. It's number one, just an absolute lack of teachers. Nobody's wanting to go into it. And part of that's because college is so expensive in South Carolina. Nobody's going to pay $100,000 for a degree to turn around and make $34,000 a year, especially if you're a first generation college student and you're paying that money back, or paying it back for until your child goes to college. So I think we need to really look at how people who are committed to being teachers are accessing scholarships, accessing grants, accessing loan forgiveness programs, and we can do that within the state. We don't have to rely on the federal government to do that. The other problem we have is a lack of diversity in teaching that is growing. Sorry, we just moved and there's a train that we did not know about that's very loud about 5 times a day. But we have a lack of diversity in teaching. I think the last numbers I saw, it was something like 86% of teachers are white females. And if we look around our buildings, that's probably pretty consistent with what we're seeing. When I was at the College of Charleston, we had the Call Me Mister program that was encouraging African-American males to go into teaching with some of those loan forgiveness, scholarship, grant support programs. And I think that's a conversation we need to have too. So better funding at the college level to attract the teachers. And then I think, again, if you make it a more respected profession, people are going to want to join it.
Well, and I would also argue, particularly if you're trying to get an increase in men into the profession, you've ultimately got to look at the salary, because yes, we're looking at, for so long, education was a second income.
You're exactly right.
For families, but and not just men, but those of us who don't have a spouse or a
right,
trust fund, that single income is getting harder and harder to live on. So I think, at the very least, you've got to elevate that salary
significantly. I mean, and we're one of the lowest in the nation. And my husband does a lot of work in Michigan. And there was a moment last year when we thought we were going to have to move there. And it was very scary. I grew up in Indiana and I don't want to go back. But looking at the contracts of teachers in Michigan and the pay of teachers in Michigan and the cost of living, which is it's comparable to here. Mm-hmm. I would make $40,000 more a year as a teacher in Michigan, with protected planning, with a protected, 745 to 345. And we have to have those kinds of conversations. If other states have figured it out, we need to figure it out.
Right. Okay. Any other questions coming in? No. There were 2 on the, sorry, Michelle, hold on.
That's okay.
On the advertisement for it, there were 2 at the bottom.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, we've got another one. Okay, so we're getting ready to talk about state standards. I know you said you were on the writing
yes,
committee for social studies, and I have some very strong opinions about our state standards.
Yes.
Coming from an English point of view, in terms of the fact that English standards are skill-based, whereas the rest of them are content, which mm-hmm, makes it very difficult to build in those 21st century mm-hmm, thinking skills when you're too busy trying to teach kids the rock cycle. Sorry, Dottie, I like to pick on the 8th grade. So here's the question. Do you feel that the state standards are age or developmentally appropriate, especially at the elementary level? If not, what plan do you have to help adjust that?
That is a good question. I have a 7-year-old, I have an 11-year-old, and I teach middle school. And like you said, it's very content heavy, and memorizing content checklists, that's not meaningful learning. And so I feel your pain as an ELA teacher. I work with my ELA teacher a lot so that we can integrate our curriculum. We're working on an essay right now on ancient Egypt, so that the kids are getting that content and skill at the same time, because that's when it really works. That integrated idea is when we see good learning. When we worked on the social studies standards, we tried to make them skills-based, moving away from those content checklists, which was a huge change. And it was very uncomfortable. At first, when we were writing, we're like, are we doing this? Are we missing anything? Are we getting the big picture here? But I think, especially at the elementary level, we have to develop those skills. We have to develop critical thinking skills. We can tell you all about, clouds all day long. But at the end of the day, 21st century learners are going to have to know how to access good information. They're always going to have a computer in their pocket, for any information they need. So being discerning media consumers, understanding how to ask good questions, understanding how to read good information. I think those skills are just as important, if not more so, than content checklists. And I think if we get serious about South Carolina standards being skills-based and get on board with our ELA friends, I think we're going to get a lot more traction for learning.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's what the content-based standards made sense when I was in school, because in order to know something, you had to go to the library and look up the, in the little, right, that sort of thing. And
our catalog,
decimal says the catalog and all of that. And, but one of the things that I think teachers get so frustrated with is that teachers are ready to catch up and move forward with the times, but we are restricted because of all of these different ridiculous things. And our board was just talking earlier about the new school report card, and how you talk about the 21st century graduate that you just talked about, and 2/3 of it has to do with world-class skills and all of that. But 80% of elementary and middle school, their report card is based on the 1/3 of academic knowledge. And so, you can't handle that if you're 80% of what you're tested or judged on is only 1/3 of the 21st century graduate.
We tend to talk a lot about data, and not just in South Carolina, but we tend to talk about data in education and then in no way pay attention to the data we're collecting or the data that's available. And so it's this weird hodgepodge, and nobody's having the same conversation about the same thing. And I think that's exactly what you're getting at.
Exactly. Yes. Okay. So knowing it exhausts teachers, what would you do about SLOs?
Okay. So SLOs, I'm on my second essay. I'm counting this Egypt one for my second essay. I think the heart of an SLO was in the right place. I think the delivery and the practicalities of it, they're not working. I think what they tried to do was quantify a portfolio for teachers. Because portfolio assessments tend to be the most honest work that we can give. We know the best view of a teacher is multiple classroom observations and a portfolio of their work. I think that's what SLOs were trying to do. The question is, I don't know what would replace it. SLOs are, and I roll my eyes every time I fill my chart, my little Excel spreadsheet out and enter my data, because mine are strictly based on writing. It's the skill, not the content. So I think the question is, there we go. If not SLOs, then what do we replace it with? Do we move to a portfolio-based assessment, which I'm all for? How do we measure it? How do we ask administrators to measure it? Or do we simplify the SLOs that we have? Do we make it so that it's not just based on map data, which can be really wonky and designed for 50% of the kids not to meet their growth for the year? What's a better tool for measuring? So I think SLO might have been a step in the right direction. It just needs to be streamlined, and again, with teacher input.
Right. I think from my own personal perspective, this is Lisa Ellis, not SC for Ed. So Lisa, one of the things about it is that I think, in the school building, administrators and teachers, you know who your strong teachers are, and you know the ones that are doing it. And so for them, you know, something like an SLO is one more hoop that they've got to jump through, which takes away time with the administrators to focus on those teachers that do need help. Because if you're, you know, if you're sitting there having to meet with a Dottie Adams, who is a rock star, and it just takes up 30 minutes of your time when you could have been focused on little Lisa Ellis, who's a terrible teacher, and really work to make her better. And so that, you know, that's one of the things that becomes such an issue, is that we're not differentiating instruction at an adult level, where you need to really focus on, if we're supposed to be differentiating instruction and, you know, personalized learning, why is that not being done for the adults in the building, you know, in order to utilize time in a very, you know, favorable method to raise every teacher to be a Dottie Adams.
So I actually worked on a grant before I went back to the classroom. This is my 4th year back in a classroom, but I worked on a grant for 2 years, and we did that. We personalized learning for teachers, and I was site-based. I had 54 teachers, and I would sit with them. What is your plan? What professional development do you need for recertification? What do you want to do? Do you want to go back and get a master's? Oh, you have a master's. Do you want to do this? And if I had a teacher who was right on that edge, they just needed that little nudge to be effective, I could spend an hour a week with that person and really get them so they felt like they were successful. Or if I had a person who was like, I'm going to just go take over the school, I'm like, cool, let me know if you need anything. And they could go do their own thing. And it was a really powerful job, and it was a really powerful model. And I don't know what that would look like on a wide scale, because having 54 teachers was a full-time job, and we can't have, you know, one person for every 54 teachers. That's a lot of overhead. But something, like you said, personalized professional development that's long-term, we know is more effective, and it keeps teachers happier, and it keeps them feeling like the professionals we want teachers to be.
Yes. Okay. The EOC and State Department of Education often seem at odds with each other. This leads to compromises, and the overall outcome isn't the best. It is just the one people could agree on. How do you plan to bridge the divide and to be more effective than past leaders in that area?
So I think that is the big question, not just for education, but almost our society right now. So we've almost lost that. Where do we, not just where can we compromise, but what's our focus? What do we want? Do we want to streamline funding? Okay, then what does it look like when we do that? Not just whatever compromise we can cobble together. Do we really want kids reading by 3rd grade? What's that going to take? Do we really respect the teachers we have in our state? How do we show that? And you have to get people working together. You have to bring everybody to the same table with a singular focus before you can make that unified change. And I think I tend to not, when I'm in a leadership position, I don't lead with the, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this. It's more of a, okay, guys, how are we going to make this happen? So that might be something that I could bring to the table to try and get those two entities to maybe have better conversations.
One of the things that I think has caused education struggles in South Carolina over the last 15, 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 years has been the lack of teacher voice. And that's something that we at SC for Ed have really focused on, trying to build that teacher empowerment and willingness and courage to advocate for ourselves as well as the profession. And we want our voice at the table, particularly when when people are making decisions that affect what my classroom looks like. I want to have a say in that. And you know, when you look at the makeup of the EOC, it's out of 15 members, it's 2 teachers, and you know, one is a teacher of the year from upstate somewhere. And you know, the state board, I think, has probably similar numbers. So what would you do as superintendent of education to make sure that that teacher voice is heard, and not just the rock star teacher of the year, but the average Lisa Ellis who is just doing her best every day, but has valuable input to give?
It would mean being on the ground. It would mean going to schools, meeting with teachers, listening to what they have to say, making myself available, finding ways for teacher feedback and so that if there's an issue that somebody in Columbia doesn't know about that's happening in Greenville, that there's a way to find out about it. It could be encouraging local school boards to have ex officio or non-voting members who are teachers. They should be there. They should be stating these ideas. I've sat on other boards where there were at least employee advisors that were non-voting members. You can't vote yourself a raise, but it was, what's going to happen if we implement this policy? And, you know, they were listened to. And I think something as simple as that, if you had 2 teachers on every school board in the state, imagine, at least that's a beginning. And I think even at the state level, we could have a teacher leader board. We could have a teacher voice board where we would have maybe people from the Low Country or the different districts around South Carolina where, okay, I've gone and talked to my teachers. Here's what we know. When I worked on the state standards with social studies, there were 40 of us writing over 2 summers, and all but maybe 4 or 5 of us were teachers. So we know teachers want to be a part of education, of change, of advocacy for children. And if you give them the opportunity, they show up and we do amazing work. So I think it's just giving that opportunity.
Okay. One of the things that is, you know, in terms of state funding and all of that is talking about the consolidation of school districts. And that's something that our current superintendent has been working on since she's been in office, and not so much the consolidation of schools, because we know that that creates big identity problems, but the consolidation of district services. So what's your opinion on that, and how would you move forward with it?
I don't know that consolidating districts is maybe in the best interest of the children, because even in a similar area, and even if you have a small rural district next to a small rural district, it doesn't mean their needs are the same. And Charleston County, I think, is a good example. It's so big that it's almost unwieldy. And the needs of, you know, someplace like Edisto are completely different than the needs of Mount Pleasant. And so even within one district, we struggle to meet those needs. I don't know that consolidating districts would be the way to go with that. I think that I would have to really sit down with those counties, those boards that were looking at it, and maybe there would be positions that could be shared, but each having still local control. Maybe some kind of a hybrid model, but I think just collapsing the districts, I think there's a danger in losing identity when we do that.
Okay. No, we're good. Okay. So Michele, those are all the questions that we have and that have been sent in. Is there anything else you would like to share while you have the attention?
I would ask, what, as teachers, I mean, I know what I want. I'm a teacher, but what as teachers, and it doesn't have to be answered now because I know you're doing some different work where this would become more present, more visible. What simple things, simple steps could we make as teachers that seem achievable? And that's what I would want to hear from. Like, what could I do as superintendent, or what could I even do as a classroom teacher to advocate for professionalism, to say, yeah, I get it. Maybe 20% raise isn't going to happen right now, but we're getting some lottery tax money and there's a surplus. How about you toss us 4 or 5%? And so maybe on Twitter, maybe on Facebook, I'm not sure. I'm a novice at these things outside of posting pictures of my kids. What would you want somebody in a position of power to do to be an advocate for teachers? What would that look like? I think that would be my biggest question as we move forward into this new model in South Carolina for teachers.
You want me to answer that, or you're just
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
Oh gosh.
I know, right? It's scary. These questions, I'm like, I've had so many thoughts for so many years, but now I don't know any of them.
You know, I think that teachers, you know, there's 52,000 of us. I finally got the actual number from the Department of Ed, and we all have our own unique experiences, but we also share the same concerns. And that's to do best by the students that we teach. And we are in it to make our students have the best life that they can. And ultimately that then brings up South Carolina to the status that we know it can be. South Carolina is a beautiful place. We have tons of great natural resources, including our children, and we're not doing right by them. And it's not because teachers don't want to do right by them. It's because we are hindered by so many mandates and expectations that have been created by people who are not in the classroom. And so, we have talked about as a board that the person who knows what is best for students is the teacher in the classroom. And you mentioned, that the pyramid, the top down has to go away. And it needs to be where the teacher voice is elevated to one where people are listening and trust that they are doing what they need to be doing. And, with any profession, you're going to have your outliers who are not there. And the goal is to get rid of them because they're, hurting children just as much as, anybody who wants to. And so I think that hopefully with this movement of SC for Ed, we have given some teachers, confidence and support in advocating for themselves and standing up for what they know is right. And as we continue on, we hope to build in more and more and, bringing teachers along and making them feel comfortable with what needs to happen in order to best meet their students' needs. And the reality of it is that you can have a classroom of 25 kids and you've got 25 kids with 25 different needs that as a teacher, you've got to figure out a way to meet them. And teachers are miracle workers. They do that every day. And, we want to be acknowledged that we are, despite all of the ways that our hands are tied, we are performing miracles every day. I was so excited to see that South Carolina is above the national average for SAT and ACT because what that tells me is despite all of the hindrances that teachers are dealing with, we're still doing what we need to do. And imagine what teachers could do if they had the resources, the money, and the time. Imagine where we could take our children. And then I think, the role of superintendent is to make sure that teachers who are that front line in the classroom are getting what they need in order to meet the needs of their students.
Excellent. I love to hear that. Yeah, students come first. And I was talking to somebody about that yesterday. And if our students are not feeling safe and loved, then nothing else matters. And more than anything, that's what teachers do every day. Yeah. And then we get to the math and the ELA and the social studies. Right. And I feel like that people forget that we love every child that comes into our classroom door every day.
And then we'll get a choice of who comes in there.
And we're going to love them regardless. Right. And then we're going to teach them after that. So no, I'm with you on that 100%.
Well, good. Well, I think that's all we have for you. Michele, thank you so much for taking can you tell us the steps? Sorry. The steps. So you're going to be a write-in candidate. So what are the steps to make that work?
So is it when you write your ballot, when you see on the ballot, it's going to have Molly Spearman and then it'll have Israel Romero because he withdrew after the ballots, even though they're electronic, after the ballots were finished. No votes for Israel Romero count. So even you can vote for him, it doesn't matter. So what you have to do is actually click the write-in. Okay. And you have to write in Michele Phillips, Michele with one L, Phillips with two. My husband says it's the worst slogan ever, and it is, but it's catchy. One L Michele. Thanks, Mom and Dad. But you have to physically write the name in. Okay, so fantastic.
Well, Michele, thank you so much for taking the time on a Sunday and, and sharing your platform and stance and all of that. And we look forward to seeing what happens next Tuesday.
Thank you so much for taking on Sunday. I know Sundays are sacred for us teachers, so I really appreciate this so much.
Oh sure. And take care and good luck.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.